Are you fascinated by the paranormal and want to hear about encounters that have happened to real-life people in real-life places? Do you need a drink to calm those nerves after hearing some scary stories?
You're listening to Booze and Bourbon.
Well, we invite you to grab a drink, whether it's a coffee or something with a little bit more spirit in it. Grab a blanket, snuggle in, because I'm Kim and that's Jen, and we're Booze and Bourbon.
We are super excited about this topic, and let me tell you when I say that we've only talked about it for, I'm not really sure how long. Kim, do you know?
I don't know, but it has been a long time. And Jen, I have to say, I am so excited to be able to do this topic and this whole experience with you.
Ditto on that, my friend.
So how are you anyway?
Oh, pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm still kind of running on a high of all the fun we've had over the past week or so.
I know, and I feel like it was also like an information overload for me. There was just so many stories and so many things said that I felt like I wish I had recorded just every minute so that I could, go over it again, time and time again.
I know. Well, the good thing is there's lots of really great books out there about Oak Island. And the other good thing is we have some resources and some new friends now that we can always lean on if we need another ghost story or two.
Very true. Very true.
I just wanted to ask you because this has been happening to me. It's every single night this week I've been having a dream about Oak Island. Have you by any chance?
Oh, dear. Well,
that sounds like a no.
Not probably as many as you've had, and probably not about the same thing.
Gotcha. My sister-in-law actually confessed that she has been having a lot of dreams of Oak Island over the past week too. So it's interesting. Definitely interesting.
I was just going to go offside with mine and say that it was more of like a pirate dream.
The Pirates of Halifax. You like them, do you?
Yeah, no, sorry, I just couldn't get it out of my head, I guess, so.
Did you know that you can follow them on Facebook and on Instagram, too, just in case you wanted to sneak up on them and creep them?
I did not know that, but I will definitely be following them now.
Yeah. So we had the pleasure of going on an actual tour on Oak Island, which was exceptionally fantastic. We had the tour guide, Lisa Moore, who is such a great storyteller. And it was one of the last tours of the year. And these are the tours that sell out back in March. So I felt so honored that we had the invitation to go, which was really cool. And it was their Halloween tour. So everybody was dressed up, and that's why the Pirates of Halifax were there as well. I got so many stories from Lisa, and some of the stories I had already heard, but I want to say the more real version of it. So those are what you guys are going to hear today. I'm also so happy that these people have trusted us enough to tell these stories. Mm-hmm. And then after the Oak Island tour on the island, we were invited by Tony Sampson, who owns the Salty Dog Sea Tours. And we got to do 2 back-to-back Booze and Bourbon / Salty Dog Sea Tours, which was so much fun. And we had some special guests. Jen?
Mm-hmm. Well, one was our friend Tammy, who we've actually had on the show before, so you guys may remember her. Mm-hmm. She's friend of treasure hunter David Blankenship and his wife Garnett, and they've actually been friends for years. And Tammy has a very special connection to the island itself in terms of just her ability to talk to the spirits.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah, which is right up her alley, and she's just an awesome person, period.
Yeah.
Another was Cindy Bussey, and she just wrote a book on Oak Island, a children's book called Annie Goes to Oak Island.
It's about her doggy.
Yeah, I know. A dog and her adventures on the island. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we did have the 2 tours back to back, which was awesome. So we had obviously some of our friends and then some special guests on our boat.
We had Jack Begley from the Curse of Oak Island. So we had 2 stars from the Curse of Oak Island. Tony, who is also a fantastic storyteller. He is probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met.
And has the coolest accent ever.
He does. And then, of course, Jack is also a very good storyteller, and he's just very engaging. And we got to ask him some would you rather questions, which you guys are going to hear later.
He also has a very nice beard that he's been working on.
He does. He really does.
Yeah.
I didn't happen to notice whether or not he was wearing his lucky shirt.
His shirt, yeah, no. I don't remember if he was or not, but the beard was on point. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background information on Oak Island if you aren't already familiar with it. It's a small island here in Nova Scotia, very close to where I live, between the towns of Chester and Mahone Bay. And Oak Island is a 140-acre piece of land that is now connected to the mainland by a causeway. And supposedly, there's treasure buried on the island, which we're starting to see a lot of things take shape here. So it's going to be interesting what the 7th season comes up with. So it's on the History Channel. And like I said, they're going into their 7th season. And it's one of the most popular shows on the History Channel too. And there's just so much history regarding the island. So there's artifacts that they've found dating back to the 1300s. I believe the coconut fibers that they found on the island too, which clearly are not native to Nova Scotia, date back to, I want to say, like 1100. And there are so many Masonic symbols on the island too. Masonic symbols are Freemasonry symbols. And they believe that there's a strong connection between the Knights Templar and the Freemasons. So the Knights Templar, they think that they came over with Henry Sinclair in 1398. And they were a religious group that were forced to dissolve back on October 13th, 1307. Then it's believed that the Freemasons formed after that time to hold the secrets of the Knights Templar. So the Knights Templar were active during the time of the Crusades and were really also the first bank. They were also thought to have guarded sacred religious items like the Holy Grail. And it's thought that there were 10 ships brought over here on an Atlantic voyage. And I believe 8 returned to Scotland along with Henry Sinclair around the year 1400. So then if you move closer to today, an area on the island called the Money Pit was discovered in 1795. And there has been an active treasure hunt on the island ever since. And that treasure hunt comes with a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and 6 people have died actively searching for the treasure. And that's what we know. That's been documented anyways. Ever since 1795, there has been a very strange and very vast amount of supernatural activity on the island. Hence the name of the show, The Curse of Oak Island. And the curse states that 7 people must die, and that all of the oak trees on the island must die too before the treasure can actually be found. Today, we're going to get into some pretty crazy stories about the island, and a little later on in the show, we're going to get into some mind-blowing stories. We also have some treasure hunters and fellow podcasters join in towards the end of the show to lend their take on Oak Island, and they're Dustin and Deidre White, who created the Could It Be? An Oak Island podcast, and they were very recently featured on the show Expedition Unknown about their treasure hunting skills. I'm so excited to have them on the show. Jen, I think you and I can both say that this was the hardest episode that we've ever done.
Yeah, definitely. Hands down. More on your end because you're the, genius when it comes to making us just come together as one.
Well, thank you. I don't know about that. I'd be nothing without you.
Oh, you're sweet. But I would definitely say, like I said before, the information overload, there was just so much that we wanted to touch on and so many stories and so many things that we wanted to make sure we included. So I just feel like it was so much harder to try to put that all together into a small time frame. So
it's really mind-boggling to think that all of these things happened. Mm-hmm. And it's also crazy to think that it looks like there were so many different people from so many different times throughout history that were on this small little island in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. So It's awesome. But what we're going to do with this episode is we're basically going to take you on an audio tour of the island, much like how we have been shown the island on both the Salty Dog Sea Tours and with Lisa Moore, who is part of the Oak Island Tours. And Jen, we've had some very recent paranormal activity happen on the island that I think solidifies for me that there is definitely something going on. The story is that somebody who was working up around the Money Pit last Saturday witnessed a ghost floating around the Money Pit. Now, this was at dark, so there were lights and stuff around, much like what we saw when we went by on the Salty Dog Sea Tours. Mm-hmm. And the ghost that was seen had red hair. Couldn't tell if it was male or female, but this person could tell that the ghost had red hair. How crazy is that?
Ginger ghosts on alert. Ginger ghosts are on the island.
Hey, maybe they were there for International Redhead Day. Wasn't that just the other day?
Oh, you're right. So maybe that's why.
Could it be?
So, for the whiskey we are having today, we are having Crown Royal Black.
It's pretty fitting, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. This is the whiskey of choice for Oak Island, which has made its own appearance on the show numerous times. Treasure hunter and Oak Island resident David Blankenship, who's also known as the Crown Lover himself, Crown Royal Lover, often uses the phrase, "It's crown time," if they find something worth celebrating.
All right, Jen. So now's about time we get into this whiskey. It's just staring here at me. So, as David Blankenship would say, it's crown time.
Crown time. Cocktail time. Drinking time.
This Crown Royal Black. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it here.
Okay.
It's a blended Canadian whiskey. It's coming in at 90 proof. The Crown Royal Black is an extra aged added oak version of the traditional Crown Royal Canadian whiskey. So in this case, black is no joke. Neither is the oak. Did you like my rhyme?
Good one. Yeah.
It's definitely one of the darkest whiskeys that I think I've seen. So just let me pour a little bit here. Pour some out for the dearly departed souls on Oak Island.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So smelling it, it smells really sweet. I'm getting some peppery spices and definitely a lot of oakiness.
Yeah. And I've already pre-tasted.
Perfect.
Because I couldn't wait.
How is it?
It is like semi-sweet. So, I mean, not exactly what we're used to, but...
yeah, no, it's good. It's good though.
Yeah.
There's definitely... you can taste a lot of the oakiness there too, and I'm still getting like cinnamon, like some of the traditional spices that you get with the bourbon, and black pepper, and maybe a little bit of like dried food or something. The finish of it though, it's pretty smoky. It almost reminds me of maybe like a campfire. This is going to go great with the rest of our storytelling for this evening. So now that we've had our crown time, it's about time for our favorite little game with the Curse of Oak Island star Jack Begley.
Would you rather spend the night on the island with me and Kim? We're all by ourselves.
Do you have that?
Or would you rather spend the night on the island with Tony? He's really thinking about it, which is disturbing.
Yeah, it's...
Because I feel like the answer is right there.
Well, there's positives and negatives to both situations.
Okay. We have snacks.
I guess a big advantage would be I have more people to trip on my way out.
Wow, that's not the answer I was looking for.
No, yeah, I'd probably choose both of you.
Okay.
We tend to be possibly
We'd
more
be a lot of
spiritually
fun.
connected.
Yeah,
And we'd bring bourbon.
and snacks, yes.
Oh, well, that would be... It would be interesting because of the amount of things that have happened at night.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to go?
Yes. Would you rather be strapped to a canoe in the supposed Oak Island Triangle,
Right.
or float in the swamp for an hour when it was super stinky?
That's easy. The Oak Island Triangle, as I discussed earlier with both of you, I do not like to take part in because of its oddness. It is a triangle of its own sort.
Yeah.
So I would always choose the swamp because a lot of my clothes already stink like it.
Okay. That was perfect.
I have swamp clothes that they already reek, and once it destroys your olfactories, you just you don't smell
here's
it
a
anymore.
complete side note.
Oh.
Did you know that there's an Instagram account for your shirt?
No.
It's called Jack Begley's shirt.
I only have one.
Oh.
Come on, Jack. You got more than one.
It's like
He's a man of
Highlander.
mystery.
Yeah.
There's only one shirt, and it's lasted for a long time.
Wow.
It's kind of
a very
like
famous
a lucky
shirt.
pair of socks or something like that.
Exactly.
You just don't give it up.
Do we want to go with one more?
Yeah.
Would you rather, and you don't have to answer this because it might be questionable, find the treasure, we'll call it, as a whole? Mm-hmm. Or would you rather be just set for life by a very giving person that just decides to like give you all of their wealth and belongings? And I can't really say for sure what that is, but
yeah. The treasure is not mine, nor if I find it, do I expect anything in return. Mm-hmm. Nor would I ever want to be set for life. Okay. It's not. That is a disorder unto its own that I wish not to achieve, because, the purpose comes from. I guess that gets quite deep quite fast. No, I'd rather just find the treasure and allow, because I don't think it's just pirate gold. I don't think it's just coins. I don't think it's, physical wealth. I think there's something more to be found on the island. But you got to know the right way. Mm-hmm. You can't end up like choosing the wrong door. And
that's why I ask, because some people like might want to take the easy exit and be like, you know what, I don't want to find it. I'll just take this, or the actual feeling of like finding it and knowing that you did and you were a part of that and that experience.
It's not just about finding the treasure with Oak Island. There's a lot of where people want to be a big part of it, and it's about just recovering the wealth and then finding a tax haven and having a good life by themselves.
Right.
But really, Oak Island is more of a calling of you want to be a part of the hunt.
Yeah.
You want to help in the progression of finding the little bits that show that there is something to be found there.
Right.
What is actually hidden on Oak Island, I think it's going to take time to figure out exactly where it's hidden, but I don't think it's just the money pit. There's wealth in the money pit. I'm sure of that. But, it's just about the hunt. Because if you tripped over a treasure chest, it doesn't mean anything.
No, that's true.
Would it mean anything if you just became wealthy overnight and were set up for life? You'd become bored with it. You wouldn't.
Oh, that's why I asked. Because some people would be okay with that, but some people would.
Yeah. You got it. It takes a little bit of having to deal with the crap to appreciate the softness.
Exactly.
And so you take the yin with the yang, and it makes the treasure so much sweeter when you worked hard for it.
Right.
And I think, too, as a viewer and knowing Tony and like hearing the stories, I think that there's this bond that happens with all of you guys. And it's like that in itself is a story
that you'll never forget. That just lasts with you.
Well, it is. I mean, and there's a lot of things to touch on that subject, but there's a lot of people just like Tony who are a big part of the entire island who don't get a lot of screen time, who don't, surface as like prominent characters, but everyone's working together.
And they have a major part. They're just not seen as much.
And it's a big change in Oak Island because there's never really been that camaraderie. There's been different opposing forces working against each other, and if everyone just was able to work together and not want to find it themselves but find it as a company, then they'd be able to achieve something. But everyone wants to get one up over the other person, and there was always the idea of, if I don't find it, I'm going to make darn sure the next guy doesn't. So
it makes it harder for you guys.
Yeah, we're the first people, but at the same time, we're some of the first people who don't want to make it harder for the next guy. We want to make it easier. Because we feel there's something there, and at our point in the discovery process, there's a little left to find that will allude to treasure.
Oh, at this point, you need to show Jack your piece of Oak Island. Is it still in your pocket?
Yes.
We need a real treasure hunter to speculate what this is. It came from Oak Island.
I almost just pulled out a pack of Rolaids instead, because that's what was in there. Here you go.
No way. You found this?
Well, I didn't. She did.
Where'd you find this at?
I was there on Sunday.
Oh, shoot.
I know, right?
This is real gold.
No, it's not.
It would be
Charles
heavier.
Dropped this from his pocket.
Really?
Mr. Barkhouse does this all the time.
Yeah.
He spray paints the
Just
rocks.
sprinkles random.
They're for the kids to find.
Oh, Kim.
Okay, guys, so just after the break, we're going to get into the main topic for today, which you all know is, what is the Curse of Oak Island? Stay tuned.
All right, guys, and welcome back. We're going to go back into a little history lesson here.
Let's all step back into time.
Yes. Since even before the year 1795, when the depression in the ground under an oak tree was found by 3 young men, there has been paranormal activity on Oak Island. People who lived around the island always mentioned that the island had an eerie vibe. They said there were strange lights and that the island must be cursed. These lights weren't just any lights. You see, at the time, there was no one living on the island. There weren't oil lamps, there weren't campfires. They were glowing lights. A very mysterious and luring set of lights came from Oak Island.
Yeah, very mysterious. And these were very, very strange lights. The 3 men who were actually lured to the island were documented as Anthony Vaughn, Daniel McGinnis, and John Smith. But we also can't forget that there could have been a 4th one. And they think that 4th one was Samuel Ball.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go into a little side note here on Samuel Ball. So he escaped slavery by joining the military. He was 13 at the time, and he was only old enough to do menial jobs like cutting wood. He later was given land by the government and traded in his land on the mainland for land on Oak Island. He was a cabbage farmer by trade. So there's also this sort of thing that maybe he was written out of history because it could have been racism, because that was obviously, unfortunately, very apparent at the time. Mm-hmm. Or there's also the possibility that he found treasure and he didn't want to be written about.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So once these young men came on the shores of Oak Island and climbed to the top of the hill, they saw an old oak tree. Underneath this oak tree was a depression in the ground. Hanging from the tree was also an old block and tackle. They decided to come back in the morning and start their dig. Once they started digging, they got to approximately 10 feet of depth and discovered a platform of oak logs. They kept digging. At another 10 feet, they discovered another layer of oak logs. In 1804, the dig continued to the depth of 90 feet, where a flat rock, now called the 90-foot stone, was discovered, with encrypted messages carved into the stone. The origins of the stone are thought to have been of some Swedish type of granite, not something that is typically found in Nova Scotia. The stone's actual carvings are unknown, but it's thought to say the 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. It is also important to note that the strange glowing lights were also said to have been seen by the local people of Chester in the 1800s. In fact, 2 fishermen in the area at the time went out in a small fishing boat to investigate them and were never seen again. See, now that's the thing about Oak Island. It lured people in. They didn't know why it did, but there was a great fear surrounding the island because of the amount of people that went there and never came back.
Yeah. So accounts of strange lights and even balls of lights have been seen by multiple people on the island, including treasure hunter David Blankenship. So David is, if you watch the show, you know he's a man who speaks his mind. So whatever really comes to his mind, it comes out. And he suffered, unfortunately, a stroke when I think he was 36 or 37. And he basically had to learn how to speak again and learn how to do everything again. So he's extremely passionate about the work that he's done on Oak Island. And his dad, Daniel Blankenship, who unfortunately passed away last year, they invested all of their time and really dedicated a lot to this island. And from what I can tell from David is he is a very factual kind of person. Like he's not the type who really wants to believe in the paranormal. It's something that he can't explain. And being around Oak Island and, being involved in the dig and finding out all this research and history on the island. Like, he's a very logical person.
Yeah.
So there was this one instance in where there was a party sometime around the 70s at the Oak Island Inn, which is now called Oak Island Resort Marina. There was probably about 100 people or so there. And all of a sudden, someone standing by the window called over to David Blankenship to come and look at the strange lights that were hovering across the island. Everyone there, to their surprise, saw this extremely strange anomaly, and they didn't know if it was a UFO or what it was, but it stayed over the island for about a good hour. Then, with just like the snap of the fingers, it was gone. It had completely vanished. So you can't say that every single person at that party was so drunk that they were seeing the exact same thing. It's just really, really strange. So actually, David Blankenship, who went from being a complete non-believer in anything sort of paranormal to pretty much convinced that Oak Island is haunted. And like we said before, our friend Tammy has seen something strange around the island as well. In one of our previous episodes, she described how she was on the hillside with her mother waiting for her father to return to the marina in his boat. And she describes it as being this extremely bright, huge boat. And at that point, she knew that it wasn't her dad's boat when they saw it coming around the marina. And her mom saw it too. So they were kind of both just sitting there like, what the heck is this? And then a little bit of time went by. It disappeared. And then shortly after that, her dad came around the corner in his boat with all of the lights. So are we going to talk about a ghost ship, Jen?
There is a local ghost ship legend in the waters of Mahone Bay. On June 27th, 1813, the Young Teaser was an American vessel owned by Samuel Adams, which I'm sure we've all heard of.
Yeah, the beer
wink,
guy.
Wink. The beer, yeah. So he owned the ship, and it was in Mahone Bay battling against other vessels. The lieutenant aboard the ship went below the deck into the gunpowder magazine and was never seen again. The ship caught fire and blew apart. Local residents rescued the survivors, who were mostly badly burned. And then the bodies were taken to a house almost directly behind where the rope loft is right now. That house is reportedly haunted. And I've even heard stories of the floorboards bleeding around the time of the Young Teaser's fateful anniversary.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Which is pretty creepy, but I love that story. Some remnants of the Young Teaser can be found in Chester. One piece is the keel of the ship. It's in the St. Stephen's Anglican Church in Chester. It's now a wooden cross at the top of the steeple. And also a beam can be found in the bar area of the rope loft.
Yes, and I also love eating at the rope loft.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. The Teaser's name somewhat returned to the oceans shortly after the explosion. The privateering was in full action and the Liverpool packet ship was taken over by the Americans. It was then renamed as the Young Teaser Ghost.
Ooh.
But it failed to capture any other ships shortly after its first voyage and was quickly taken back and renamed once again back to the Liverpool packet. How spooky is that?
I think it's pretty cool that they called it the Young Teaser Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
So what's strange, though, is what people describe about this ghost ship was actually not anything close to what Tammy saw. She said that she saw something that was about 80 feet long, and when people describe seeing the Teaser, they see its mast on fire, and she did not see that.
Right. So, now we'll get into the curse of Oak Island.
Please do.
The curse states that 7 men will die in the search for the treasure before it is found.
So I guess the biggest question here is who came up with the curse? And it's actually unknown. Some people say that it was Lee Lamb, who has also been featured on the show, and she's one of the last surviving members of the Restall family. Her brother and her father both died in a shaft while searching for treasure. They died of being exposed to hydrogen sulfide fumes, which caused them to pass out and fall to their unfortunate deaths. Lee firmly believes there is something paranormal and malevolent on the island.
Then there's the story of a lady who kept dreaming about the island. She was a psychic and she was just absolutely drawn to the island without knowing anything about it. She said that the island was cursed, that 7 people must die while actively searching for treasure. She said that all of the oak trees must also die before the treasure is found. The oak trees that are currently on Oak Island are not the same variant of oak that were once on the island. The oaks that were on the island during the early treasure hunting days were like large umbrellas without any limbs at the bottom. They definitely stood out in comparison to the oaks that are on the island today. So perhaps those are the oak trees the psychic was talking about. But honestly, no one knows exactly where the curse comes from. I guess when you think about it, a lot of buried treasure stories have legends of curses attached to them, likely to thwart away anyone coming to steal the treasure.
Yeah. So I've also had a nightmare.
I was going to say, now you should tell us about your nightmare.
I've had a nightmare about the island, and I'm sure it means nothing, but I think that as we get into a lot of these ghost stories about Oak Island, it's like every different spirit or paranormal happening on the island, it's like it has its own story to tell, and maybe it's got its own historical story to tell. I don't think my my nightmare had that, but for some reason, I was fortunate enough to be part of the crew. And I was standing outside of the war room, and the Laginas wanted me to provide them with this so-called information that I knew. So I'm standing outside of the war room, and there's this young boy who's like 5 or 6 years old. He has almost like a dark brown hair, sort of bowl cut. And he's walking closer towards me, and he's pointing at me. And I went to like grab his arm to like push him away. And I'm like, "Who are you?" And he just kept looking at me, and he just kept getting closer and closer and closer. And I was like, "You need to tell me who you are. Who are you?" And then once I said that, I started to feel like I was standing on quicksand, and everything started to get like sucked underneath of the war room. And I look around, and all of the crew members are standing there, and they're starting to get sucked underneath of the ground as well.
Oh God.
And I woke up and I was in a full sweat.
So, yeah, I bet.
I don't know what it means. There's probably, if somebody can look up in a Dreamer's dictionary what that means, please let me know.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you first get to the island by car along the causeway, you reach a parking lot. And in that parking lot, you'll see a large interpretive center, which is a museum and a gift shop. And on the other side of the parking lot, you'll see the Oak Island Canteen, which Jen and I funneled Crown Royal at.
Yes.
Some of the people who work in the interpretive center say that it too is haunted. After arriving in the morning to open up the center, they have witnessed the motion detectors go off in the bathrooms throughout the night on their security cameras. So, you could possibly chalk it up to an insect or a mouse or whatever. But Jen, you've made a really good point about this. There's been a lot of people recently that see stuff happen on their security cameras as well as their baby monitors, right?
Yes, quite a few actually.
Yeah. So who's to say it's not a ghost? And there's so many artifacts in that center too that, maybe some of them are haunted. Maybe there's energy tied to them. Who knows? So some people who come onto the island experience their faithful watches stopping once they've arrived on the island and then starting up again as they approach the swamp area, which is like a full 8.5 minutes later. Some other people arriving on the island, part of the film crew actually, have heard voices of their deceased relatives coming through their headsets. And of course, there's always the stories of cold spots and whispering voices that have been experienced so many times on the entry area of this island, so it's hard to count them all. But once you leave the interpretive center area and start going along the main road, the real spooky stories start. The ones that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Mm-hmm. So Lisa Moore, the tour guide from Oak Island Tours, is going to tell us right now in great detail of some of the experiences that have happened to her along this road.
It's a mass of not a solid form, but has no legs. It floats above the ground and moves through the trees, out through the woods and along this road. And it leaves most people who see this apparition with a very deep fear of that entity here on Oak Island. Perhaps not a very friendly spirit. David Blankenship, who lives just over here, he talks about seeing a giant fireball hovering over Oak Island on one day when he was out and driving towards home. Back in the early 70s, there are reports of a family on the mainland seeing something very similar. They saw this bright light in the sky hovering over Oak Island, and it stayed there for over an hour before it finally vanished. And the stories go that these bright lights in the sky often hover over the areas where treasure is buried.
So, Jen, there's actually a really good story, too, that you and I have heard. And it's about the same area. So there was a film crew who were going to take some video footage up around the money pit. And it was early in the morning. And this film crew were driving in a van. And not really paying too much attention to the road. I mean, there's no oncoming traffic or anything. They saw this black mist in the shape of a human just go through the van from front to end. And then they continued to see it as they drove forward. So it was still on the road. So I think a lot of them in the car or in the van were like, oh my gosh, we need to stop. We just hit something. And the driver was like, you guys are crazy. We're not stopping. That was not a human. Let's just continue on. And from what we've heard, the film crew took an exceptionally long time to get up to the money pit area. And that was why. And I don't think a whole lot of people believed them in the beginning, but they were definitely shaken up about this whole experience.
I would say.
Another person who has witnessed this figure of a human that was on the island, Rick Lagina, also had an instance. So he's one of the brothers that the show focuses on. And he was in his truck one day and he went to go to put it in drive, and he did. And then he went to depress his foot on the gas pedal and he couldn't actually drive forward. And then he starts to see this shape in front of the vehicle. And he stopped and he put the vehicle back in park and then tried to do it again. And that time he had no issues. But he did say that it seemed like a shape of a large man that was pushing the truck and therefore he could not move.
Super creepy.
And so Lisa has also described the feeling of disorientation and also whispers from the woods next to one of the Samuel Ball properties, which is on this main road as well. So Lisa is going to describe this for us as well.
About 5 years ago now, I had an encounter with one of the presences here on Oak Island who's not quite so friendly. I wasn't expecting to have this experience. I had been out on the island for the day working with Craig Tester. He and I were working out on these lots way in the back, and it had been a beautiful afternoon. It was a hot summer day. It was a beautiful day. Not a care in the world. We have been doing some work here on the island, the two of us, not had any experiences up until that point. Craig had to leave for the day, so I went back out to retrieve some of my equipment, not thinking about anything happening here on the island, when suddenly I became very disoriented, and it took me almost 45 minutes to actually find the spot where I had left my equipment. And I had passed by that spot dozens of times before earlier in the afternoon. Once I had found my equipment, I gathered myself up and I gathered my camera, and I headed out to take a few pictures of some things that Craig and I had seen earlier that afternoon, when suddenly I was overcome by this chill. It was like an iceberg overcame the island, and I was immediately frozen, and every hair on my body stood up on end. And it was like there was a voice yelling in my head, "Get out!" And so I heeded its warning and immediately hightailed it out of there. And I ran from that spot, and I will tell you, while I have spent over 20 years as a firefighter, not much scares me, but I won't go back there by myself ever again. Because whatever is back there did not want us back there. That's for sure.
Along this road is also the entranceway to treasure hunter Fred Nolan's property. Fred Nolan unfortunately just passed away a few years ago. At the beginning of his driveway, he found what he calls the sarcophagus stone, which is eerie upon itself. It is a large stone, flat on the back, and when it's laying down, looks just like a sarcophagus that you would see in the pyramids of Egypt. Fred was a surveyor by trade and spent an insane amount of time surveying the land. During one of his explorations on the island, he found 6 large stone boulders making a Christian cross on the island. Each stone was carefully excavated to prove that these stones weren't put there by Mother Nature. and that they were placed in these areas on purpose. The stones are carefully placed at a total length of 867 feet and 720 feet across. The central boulder was found underneath the ground, buried. A face-like appearance seems to have been carved into its surface, as well as the outline of a sword. The central boulder is sandstone, whereas the other boulders are granite. Fred had an encounter with a murder of crows one day. He felt as though the crows were mocking him. They kept following him around. It spooked him so much. His theory was that the crows were the spirits of the workers who died creating the architectural masterpieces on the island. After the incident with the crows, Fred Nolan vowed to never spend a night overnight on Oak Island, even though he had a beautiful home on the ocean of this island.
So Fred also believed that the swamp played an integral role in the mysteries of the island. The swamp is a perfectly shaped triangle, and of course it's thought to have been a man-made structure, and it's also backed onto his property. So they believe that this swamp, because of its location essentially between, we'll say, two islands, there is an exceptionally deep channel going in between these two islands. So they believe that, this is nature, this is something natural. And if somebody was to come in with a ship, they could just park it right in there. And so that's what they think they did, is put it in there and then put up a cofferdam of boulders of sorts on both sides of the island. And they made it a perfect triangle, which is a Freemasonry symbol. So that's also interesting. And the swamp, they just let the swamp do its thing. So it is believed right now that there is a large ship in between these two islands. But I guess we're going to find that out in season 7.
Mm-hmm.
So our friend Tony Sampson, along with Jack Begley, pulled out a massive 16-foot long piece of wood that appeared to be a floorboard from the ship in the swamp. So like I said, we're probably going to see a lot more of the swamp in season 7. And when we were on the island, we weren't allowed to take any photos of this area, but I can tell you that there are a lot of large wooden dowels marking what appeared to be the anomaly in the swamp. And when they are going over all the new trailers and everything for season 7, they're all saying, it's a 250-foot anomaly and it's only about 24, 25 feet wide, and it's probably a Spanish galleon. So Tony's thoughts on the swamp, he gets some creepy vibes, and other people say that when you're near the swamp, you also get a creepy vibe. So we're going to play a little clip here from Tony.
So right from all the way from season 1, the swamp has always held a mystery. And if you look back, Fred Nolan believed that the swamp was an integral part of the island there as well. And I've dove in the swamp many, many, many times. And quite often when you're pulling your way through the mud and the roots and the blackness there, you'll feel a cold feeling come over your whole body. And then the hairs on the back of your neck will stand up, almost like something is around you or with you in the swamp at the time.
It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. So Jack's been in that swamp many an occasion as well.
He's also mentioned that the swamp, because of its likeliness of being man-made, may be where the money pit was constructed from. In a nearby area along the coastline of the South Shore, close to Oak Island, is a place called the Ovens. Geologically, there are massive caves at the Ovens Park that appear to be worn through by the ocean. When the tide is slightly up, you can take a small kayak through them. Historically, it's thought that the indigenous people of Nova Scotia used these caves, and privateers and pirates also used these caves to hide sacred items. There are geological similarities with Oak Island. Perhaps these caves were lining the shorelines of the two islands, and then they were dug further into tunnels into the embankment underneath of where the money pit is. So Tony thinks that perhaps the money pit was constructed from the bottom and built going up with all the dirt and oak platforms. And I have to think that that's very logical.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of sense instead of digging this big hole and then just like lowering somebody into this like 200-foot shaft and then just starting to build from there. It just makes a lot of sense if they could do it from the very bottom.
Exactly. The energy force fields by the swamp. There have been accounts since the 70s that there is a strange force field on the island that certain sensitive people feel. It gives them a terrifying feeling before they feel compelled to run off the island. A couple who were touring the island said that they felt like they walked through a stone wall in an undisclosed location on the island. Local Oak Island and Chester area historian Danny Henniger worked as a tour guide on the island. It was during the days of Triton Alliance, which was headed by Daniel Blankenship and David Tobias. Danny recalls one day that him and his coworker were sitting on the picnic table during a slow, hot summer day, and they saw a man walking briskly towards them. He was trying to get the words out between his gasps for air to tell Danny and his coworker what happened. He explained that he was walking close to the swamp area. Just when he approached the lining of the trees, he said he walked through a cold spot, and then a hot spot, and then again a cold spot, until the hairs on his arms were standing up and he was so cold. The spooked man decided that he would continue to head back to his car, mumbling about spirits and energy fields. Other workers at the reception center said the man got in his car and sped off the island, spitting up a trail of dust behind him.
I can't say I blame him.
No.
So now we're going to get into one of the creepiest things that's ever happened on Oak Island, and this has to do with Dan Henske and his possessions. Treasure hunter Dan Henske was given a place to stay on the island, known today as the Henske Shack, and he stayed there throughout the cold winter months, even when no excavation was taking place. Henske was given free rein to do what he wanted on the island, to explore as much as he wanted. His extremely humble home, which is still on the island, is located very close to the money pit and next to the borehole that David's father, Daniel Blankenship, created. Henske, along with Dan Blankenship, decided to further their search around the area. Mr. Blankenship suggested to Dan that dowsing rods seemed to work in locating water under the ground and caverns. He didn't know how, but he just knew that they worked. He suggested that him and Henske should try out this practice near 10X, which is a borehole next to the money pit. Within minutes of testing out the practice, Henske was convinced that it was working. He could literally feel something coming up from the ground, and he was feeling it go all throughout his body, and he could feel it into his hands. He was so shaken up by the experience and the feeling that he handed the rods over to Dan Blankenship, constantly wondering what was happening to him and why he was getting this feeling. So they went back to Dan Blankenship's home and went into the kitchen, and that's when the possession was evident. Henske started to yell and shout, "I had to kill you! I had to kill you!" Blankenship asked, "Who?" And then Henske said, You lost a chest in the water, and I had to kill you." Henske claims that he was possessed by the spirit of a slave who worked on the island. Another slave had lost a chest in the water, so they chained him to a post. He said, "I knew they were going to torture him to death, so I cut his throat to let him die quickly. I saw it and I felt it with perfect clarity, and then I blacked out." Henske was then taken to a psychiatric ward in Halifax for 2 weeks. So I find this story particularly fascinating because of exactly what Dan Blankenship had claimed he had seen from the footage from 10X, and that was a body at the bottom of the cavern. And he had it with, this was back in the 70s, so the footage on the TV was really blurry and everything, but at least he saw what he truly believed was down there. And so he saw a body at the bottom of the cavern, chained to a post, laying in a fetal position. They have also said that this body doesn't necessarily have a head, and this was shown on the TV show. And also there have been bones pulled out of another borehole close by called H8. And one of the bones is from a Middle Eastern descent, and the other partial bone, which proved to be of European descent. And what's really interesting is just recently they have discovered that the bones from the Middle Eastern person were actually bones from a female.
Yes.
So Dan Henske returned to Oak Island after this unimaginable experience to help out Dan Blankenship, but remained cautious and weary. So after conversing with the treasure hunter Fred Nolan, Fred actually suggested to Henske that there are good spirits on the island, but there's also evil ones. So then the story continues. On a clear, crisp February night, Dan was convinced that Oak Island was a portal to hell. Dan started to get this overwhelming feeling that the evil entities were taking over the island. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of his eye, he saw what looked like a grim reaper. The spirit seemed to point towards Dan and start to come after him. And that's when he saw glowing red eyes. And they weren't from a stature of a human, but probably closer to the height of a dog. So he recalled them looking like hellhounds, which we actually have covered in one of our episodes, and that these were dogs with glowing red eyes. And they started to chase after him. So he felt extremely trapped. He ran and he ran in every direction he possibly could. And he headed towards the causeway, and he could see these creatures chasing after him. And he'd go further into the woods, and he would see these creatures chasing after him. And he felt like they were closing in on him, and he was completely trapped. So where else could he go? So in a very quick moment of deciding what he was going to do, he headed for the shoreline of the island with just a few belongings that he had. Really all that he had. And he stripped off all of his clothes, and he plunged into the cold, dark waters right then and there and swam to the shore wearing only a yellow hard hat. So then he was found naked the next day, curled up into the fetal position on the floor of the house of somebody on the mainland. So once again, he returned to the psychiatric ward, and Dan remembers nothing from this moment that he plunged into the water. Being such a very logical man, knowing so much about history and how things work, this just totally didn't make sense to him. His only thoughts were that he must be crazy. So upon returning to the island for the search of the treasure along with the Laginas, Blankenships, and Fred Nolan, Dan Hensky remained convinced that the island was influenced by evil spirits. Because anything that can go wrong with equipment on Oak Island seems to go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the area surrounding 10X, our friend Tammy also has a story of a paranormal large mass by 10X and has communicated with it. Her and David went out one evening with a spirit box. They were able to communicate with the spirit. It gave them its name, how old it was, and what its purpose was on the island. Then by the 10X borehole shaft, she set out 2 flashlights close to the decking of the shaft. She asked the spirit to turn on the flashlights, and boom, both flashlights came on. The tour guide Lisa Moore often feels a heavy weight on her chest and an uneasy feeling when she approaches 10X.
Oak Island often gives me a lot of pressure on the top of my chest, and there are some days where I literally find it very difficult to catch my breath out on this end of the island. And also there have been a few people who have had some interesting encounters over in that building.
Her son calls 10X the cork of Oak Island. Where once the hole was dug and the hole was exposed, it was like a cork being taken off of a bottle of spirits. They think that there has been a substantial number of people who lost their lives in Oak Island. Only a small fraction they have account of. If there were 100 workers, they could have completed the work on the island over a span of 3 years. It seems strange that hundreds of workers would have completed the work on Oak Island, and not one person knows who put where, when, and why. What we can only assume is that they were killed in order to keep their secret, or they were part of such a brotherhood of secrets that they felt it was their obligation to never ever tell, and that they would die with the secrets on this island.
So now we're going to go to another area that is close to this area called Smith's Cove. And if you watch the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What's interesting about this story is that red coats were used to signify British military between the 17th and 20th century. Residents living in Chester during this time actually turned their jackets inside out to show the satin red lining when they would see ships approaching the harbor to avoid being attacked. And this was mostly done by the women who were left on the mainland while their husbands were at war. So during the late 1930s, a family by the name of the Adams family were living on Oak Island, where they worked as caretakers. They had a 4-year-old daughter named Peggy, who had actually sadly never been to school and had never been exposed to books. So one day during the winter, she had been playing outside, and she ran inside with excitement to tell her mother that she had seen multiple men wearing red coats and hats looking like firemen's hats. So Peggy and her mother ended up retracing her steps and reached a location between the Money Pit and Smith's Cove, but there were no footprints in the snow. as though nobody had been there. So just off the shoreline of Smith's Cove, there's a very peculiar place, Jen. Do you want to tell us about this peculiar place? I mean, Jack did mention it in our Would You Rather.
That's true. That's true. Well, it has been nicknamed the Oak Island Triangle, similar to that of the Bermuda Triangle. There is a bathymetry survey map which shows the depths and undulations of the ocean floor surrounding Oak Island in the Interpretation Center, and almost directly below where this supposed Oak Island Triangle is a huge outline of a skull. It's very, very strange. It's almost impossible to miss if you look at that map. Reports say that radio equipment fails, cell phones sometimes glitch, and their screens black out. People have lost so many engine props here, and there's an all-around feeling of disorientation that happens here. Tony Sampson recalls the story of a man who pretty much broke down into tears when a machine that propels underwater completely broke down. He kept saying this has never happened anywhere before and was nearly inconsolable. But this kind of thing happens so much on Oak Island that this wasn't a surprise to Tony. It's not a surprise to anyone who has worked on the island for any amount of time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said before, anything that can go wrong on Oak Island usually does go wrong on Oak Island. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to get into the very sad story here of the Restall family. So there were members of the Restall family who passed away near the cave-in pit and near Smith's Cove. It happened in 1969, and both Robert Restall and his son Robert Restall Jr., along with 2 other workers, passed away. They died of being exposed to hydrogen sulfide fumes, which caused them to pass out and fall to their unfortunate deaths. One man who was a local and quite the rough and tumble kind of guy was given an opportunity to be employed on Oak Island. Not many people gave him much time of day, so he was extremely grateful that the Restalls had given him work. He really loved them. When he found out that the accident happened, he didn't want their bodies to be left at the bottom of the shaft. So what he did, is what he felt he needed to do, was to rescue them himself. Even though he was aware of the danger of the fumes, he took his handkerchief, he urinated on it, and then put it over his face. He went down into the shaft and retrieved the first body. Someone on the mainland had an old World War I mask and brought it over to the island for Jimmy to try out. No one was actually aware if this mask would work and if it would keep the fumes from killing Jimmy as well. But sure enough, he put it on and braved his soul, and he went down to retrieve the rest of the bodies. After this horrific day, Jimmy was acting as security on the island overnight. He fell asleep and woke to something massive and heavy pushing down on his chest, and it actually screamed at him, and it said, "You're not the one I was looking for." So in the morning following this incident, he looked upon his chest and he found that he had large hand-shaped bruises all over his chest. Apparently, Jimmy was the type of man that would talk about anything, but he only spoke of this incident years and years later for fear that people would call him crazy. I don't blame him.
No. The Lagina brothers, Marty and Rick, these brothers were interested in Oak Island since the 60s, when an article was written in Reader's Digest about the island. Only about 14 years ago is when the brothers actually had the opportunity to purchase lots on Oak Island and fund the dig along with Marty's business partner, Craig Tester, who just happens to be Jack Begley's dad. Marty Lagina claims that although he does not believe in the supernatural, he gets scared every once in a while on Oak Island. It would seem that Rick wanted to change Marty's mind, and he decided to give Marty a brotherly dare. The Lagina brothers drove out to borehole 10X one night. After stepping out of the car, Marty heard the nastiest scream he's ever heard, and he said it was a blood-curdling scream. Frightened, Marty jumped back in the car and tore off, nearly running over Rick on his way back. Marty does not attempt to explain the noise he heard that night at all. Marty also says it's strange that there are so many equipment malfunctions on the island and wonders if Oak Island is cursed.
Yeah, I think it is. Then we get into another Lagina family member. This is of Alex Lagina. So Alex is pretty much a non-believer in the paranormal. He looks for facts when it comes to an argument. One night, him, his dad, and Rick went up to the Money Pit area, which is right next to 10X, and Marty and Rick got out of the truck to take a look at something. Alex was left in the truck all by himself, and it was so quiet. He couldn't hear the voices of Rick and Marty anymore. Then all of a sudden, he hears someone say, Alex. And he heard it out of one ear. And then he heard someone say, Alex, in another ear. And the voice kept repeating his name as it got closer and closer. All of a sudden, Alex jumps out of the car and starts yelling at Rick and Marty to give it up. The joke clearly wasn't funny. But Rick and Marty were so far away that they couldn't actually hear Alex. And when they finally got back to the truck, Alex was still insistent on his dad and uncle playing a trick on them. But unfortunately, they weren't. So it's very undetermined where this voice came from. What I want to say is that there's something so compelling about Oak Island that it just has this tendency to bring so many people from so many different parts of the world together to solve these mysteries. So we've got treasure hunters, we've got researchers, we've got historians, psychics, mediums, paranormal investigators. So the island clearly has a draw that captivates so many people. I don't know if it's just a lure for treasure or what it is. But as for what's actually on the island, it is still a great mystery. And as Lisa Moore said, it's like Oak Island is made up of several puzzles, but we're missing so many pieces to each puzzle. So now, Jen, we get to check in with our fellow podcasters, Deidre and Dustin White from the Oak Island podcast, Could It Be? And we're going to ask them some questions. We have the pleasure of having Deidre and Dustin, who are the creators of the Could It Be an Oak Island podcast with us. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're excited to be on here with you.
Yeah, so how did you guys get into this podcasting world?
Well, we had talked about it for a long time, much like anybody else, and kept going, what do we want to do? What do we want to do? And then Dustin had this idea, well, we both love recap shows. As far as podcasting goes. And he was like, well, what about the Curse of Oak Island?
Yeah, there was no podcast dedicated to like a recap for the Curse of Oak Island. Actually, even before that, we wanted to do a podcast about treasure hunting because that's kind of our passion. It's like one of the things that we do with each other, like
all the time.
When we're running through the house, like we'll be talking about treasure hunts all day long because it's like just the main thing that we do with our lives, basically. Yeah. And Deidre and I wanted to do a podcast about that, but it was hard to know where to begin. And we were familiar with recap podcasts about other things. Like one of my favorite TV shows is Survivor, and there's like 100 podcasts for Survivor, But I looked up at my other favorite TV show, The Curse of Oak Island, and there's like nothing.
We found something in French.
Yeah, there's some thought, hey, well, that's a good place to start. We can jump in there, give a voice to the community that, doesn't, there's just nobody talking about the Curse of Oak Island. And so we wanted to do that. And so that's where we started.
Yep. So I just jumped onto Amazon. I was like, what kind of recording stuff do we need? It showed up like a week later. We're like, I guess we have to figure out how to do this. And here we are today.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are definitely killing it in the podcast world. And Oak Island has such passionate fans that I'm sure your podcast picked up really quickly with the fans.
It did.
It did, and which kind of surprised me. We had no idea.
Yeah, we thought we'd probably have a couple of dozen listeners or something, but
like my mom, maybe.
Yeah, we kind of get like, thousands of listeners every week. So it's pretty exciting and pretty cool. Okay. So before the show, like there wasn't much, like a lot of people didn't know a lot about Oak Island. It was more of a kind of almost a folklore kind of thing, right? It's become a huge, huge hit for the History Channel. And they have millions upon millions of people trying to, wanting to watch these people have success. And it just only made sense to us to, that'd be a good place to start with our podcast or our podcasting, because it was just something that was ripe for the picking. Like it needed a show like ours. So we were there for it.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. And from what I understand, you guys are avid treasure hunters yourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Big time.
And you were recently on the Discovery Channel?
Expedition Unknown.
That's right. I was away for work that day, but I said to my roommate for the week, I was like, let's set the DVR. I need to see this episode. It was awesome.
Well, thank you. It was a once in a lifetime experience, and we had a lot of fun, and you kind of get nervous at first, but we had a really good time.
Yeah. That's great. What was it like meeting Josh Gates?
He's larger than life. and super cool. Like, he was very nice. He's almost exactly like you would think.
Yeah,
he's just who he is, and he was fun. He was really into our theory. He has his own ideas about a lot of the puzzles that we were working on, and it was cool to hear some of that stuff. And unfortunately, we didn't find the buried treasure, but 99% of the people that show up on the show, they don't find buried treasure, right?
It's called treasure hunting, not treasure finding.
Exactly.
Right?
Right, exactly.
You know what was really funny? Was it the next week or the following week after that? Gary Drayton shows up on Expedition
I
Unknown.
know. It was a great episode. I think it was that following week. Him and Gary are going through the swamp.
Magnet fishing. It was a different swamp.
That's true. It was a
Not
different
the Oak Island
swamp. And Gary hit him with a tree limb, and it was quite hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like Josh Gates needs to go to Oak Island and explore that swamp because as you guys know, Jen and I have put together this episode and we have come across some pretty crazy stories. And I know you guys are a little on the fence about paranormal activity on the island, which is totally cool. But we did have a little conversation with Tony Sampson, who has been in the swamp many times. And even he has said, yes, there's definitely a very strange feeling when you go into the swamp. So one thing else I need to tell you guys, because I know you're always up on the latest things to go on in Oak Island. There's actually a very recent paranormal sighting on Oak Island.
Oh, really?
By the ROC team.
Oh, okay. What happened?
Up where they have the caissons right now is around the Money Pit. And it was on October 26th. In the evening, and one of the workers there said he was seeing an apparition floating around the Money Pit, and the interesting part is that it had red hair.
What did you think of the Oak Island episode that Maddie Blake did last year with the paranormal activity? You know, they were doing some ghost hunting. They were talking about Dan Henske's experiences with being shaken awake? Or Dave Blankenship had that sighting of some kind of strange orb over the water.
Yep.
You know, what do you guys think about that kind of stuff?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's definitely some things that are probably played up for TV, but there's also what we discovered in this whole process. There's a lot of details that haven't been spoken about, especially about the Dan Henske situations. Have you guys read the book by Randall Sullivan?
I'm about halfway through.
Okay, so the very last chapter, he kind of gets into a little bit of the paranormal stuff that happens on Oak Island. He kind of glosses over it as well, but we did have somebody explain to us in great detail about actually 2 possessions that Dan Henske had. And the first one was completely witnessed by Daniel Blankenship.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's pretty intense. And from gathering a little bit of background character info on Dan Henske, I think this was one of the furthest things that he would have ever wanted to happen to him. He's a very logical kind of man. So
yeah,
I want to know what you guys think about all of this. I mean, I heard your episode where you kind of went over, the episode where they talked about a lot of this paranormal stuff. So if you guys aren't believers, what do you think all of this hype is?
Well, as far as the Dan Henske thing goes, I mean, what is he to gain from such a thing? I mean, that's kind of a lot of these paranormal sightings. What do people have to gain from lying about it? So that's always got that's got me thinking, but I've never seen anything myself. And so it's hard to believe unless you've seen it. And I would love to see some of that stuff. I don't know how much you guys deal with Bigfoot, but I'm a big Bigfoot believer. So
he is.
That's something I like. Deidre's not so into that, but
that's awesome.
I don't know. I'm open to it. I would like to be able to see it so that I can believe it.
I think that one thing that can't be denied, whether or not you believe in spirits or whatever, is you can't deny that they had an experience one way or another. And I just, from that little bit of time, especially that Dan Henske spoke on the show about it, I mean, it can't be explained. What does he have to gain from saying something like that? But just the look of him describing that experience, there's no denying in my mind that something happened.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think a lot of people looked at him as being crazy, and it's unfortunate because I think that he truly believed that he had these experiences and he went and sought help to get, over these experiences, but he had enough courage to come back to the island and tell his story. So I think that's pretty cool.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, he's a big hero to a lot of people now. So, cause he's now the elder statesman of the island, right?
Yeah.
He's been there longer than anybody else now. So, I don't think anybody takes his words lightly. They may have in the past, but not anymore, because literally he has nothing to gain from telling lies about that kind of stuff. So, I believe him, but I would like to see some kind of proof. But he can't show us any proof. I would like to see my own kind of proof. But it's hard to ask for such things when we're on the other side of the country.
Yeah, I can't summon a spirit to you.
Also, evil spirits on the island, so you're going to have to be quite selective. Do you guys have any plans on coming out to Nova Scotia anytime soon?
We haven't, made any. We want to
we
so
want to
badly.
really bad. Yeah,
we just haven't yet.
Yeah.
I also should get my passport. Dustin has beat me to that, so that would be a thing.
Yeah, if we went, Deidre wouldn't be able to come back. She would be trapped on Oak Island.
In good hands there. The guys seem like they're all really nice guys and would look out for you.
Well, they need a woman on the team anyway, right?
Yeah, need an additional woman. Give me a shovel. I'm in.
I know.
It's just such an awesome TV show. It gives people hope, That's what I think about The Curse of Oak Island. Like, there's always hope that they're going to find something big.
Exactly. Yes.
Or something small.
Well, even the small finds are a lot of fun.
Yes.
Definitely. So what do you guys expect to see out of season 7?
A lot of time in the swamp.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm excited for them to get to the swamp. So last year, episode 1, they're like, all right, we're going to go after the big 3. We're going to go after the Money Pit, Smith's Cove, and the swamp. Well, the swamp wasn't even touched on until like the last episode. And so we were waiting all season for that swamp, and now we're finally going to get it. And so we're excited for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some big discoveries in the swamp. And even when I was there last weekend, we weren't allowed to take photos of the swamp area.
Really?
Yeah, and it's drained at this moment in time, and there are a lot of huge wooden dowels. And, my imagination may have gotten away with me a little bit, but I was like, that could be the outline of a ship where those dowels were.
Well, that's what they're hoping to find there. So I hope they found a ship. That'd be sweet.
Me too.
That'd be really cool.
Tony's theory too is definitely that the sides of the swamp had natural caverns.
Oh,
so
really?
he thinks that perhaps the Money Pit was built from traveling through those caverns and, making further tunnels and then building the Money Pit from the very bottom up.
Yeah, we love hearing Tony talk when he's on the show and when he's on like those Maddie Blake specials. And he's talking about how, he thinks that the swamp was artificially made with, it was 2 islands. There's a channel in the middle. They kind of blocked off each end with cofferdams to fill in, sink the ship that they may or may not have found there. It would have been an artificial swamp. And I love that. I hope that's right. That's one of our favorite theories.
Yeah, mine too. I love it. And so if you guys could put sort of a name on what it is you think the ultimate biggest treasure is going to be on Oak Island, sort of like what theory do you think it falls with?
Well, Deidre looks like she's thinking.
I'm thinking.
It's easy for me to spit this out because I hope it's the Knights Templar treasures with the centerpiece at being the Ark of the Covenant. That would be the best thing ever.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you with the Knights Templar. And if it's not Knights Templar, I definitely think there's some huge religious value to the treasure.
Yeah, just anything historically important, which any of this is going to be at this point. That's really what I'm rooting for. As much as gold shiny things are awesome.
Hey, that would be historically important too.
It would be. I would just love to see any type of parchments that survive, any type of writings from who knows how long ago that's really got some documentation of what happened there, or not the long lost manuscripts of Shakespeare.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm not a huge Shakespeare fan. So spent too much time with that in high school. I'm okay not having to read that.
You're okay with not having new Shakespeare material?
Yeah, I'm okay. I can cope with that.
I bet you the world would love that.
Yeah, the world would probably love that.
Yeah, it'd be cool if there was some kind of old documentation of, I don't know, like, what do you mean? Like on...
I would love to see some old deeds or any type of record keeping. Obviously, any type of books are from way back in the day are going to be very important. It wasn't cheap to make books.
It wasn't.
Right.
Oh, that's
a good point.
If that stuff's down in the money pit, though, probably not going to survive very
Unless, well, they were sealed they were like wax, what do you want to call them? They're like wax bags. Mm-hmm. And if they haven't been torn up with a case on or something like that, you know, any of it that would survive, I think really would give us a look into what happened on the island. Well,
I didn't realize that about the wax bags.
Mm-hmm. Important documents back in the day would have been, especially if they're being traveled overseas, put into a wax bag and sealed, and like an animal skin or something like that. Deeds, property records would have been done the same way.
Interesting.
It'd be cool for the historic perspective. I don't know that would excite me as much as like the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
Or whatever.
That would be pretty cool. And even too, we could tie in those like manuscripts or documents. Maybe it does prove that there is a bloodline from Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be something?
Wow, that would be something.
Well, that's something that the Knights Templar might have had in their possession.
That's true.
So that all could tie together.
Very, very true.
Could it be?
Could it?
I think it could be.
I'm sure you guys have said that phrase a lot.
All the time.
Yeah, we shout at each other all day.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else that you guys want to talk about specifically?
Sure. One thing I'd like to throw out there is we do the Could It Be an Oak Island podcast, but we also do another podcast weekly about treasure hunting called Boots and Armchairs, a treasure hunters podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's been a lot of fun to do. And that's what we wanted to do originally when we started podcasting, but it was hard to know where to begin. And we know a lot more now. And so we jumped off of that boat recently, and it's been a lot of fun. Something that you might be interested in is there was this treasure hunt book a couple years ago called Breakfast, Tea, and Bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That
seemed up your alley.
Yeah, it seemed up your alley, right? This book has 3 treasure hunts within its pages.
Oh,
and
cool.
So far, only the first one has been solved. The second one hasn't even officially begun yet, but there is a bonus Breakfast, Tea, and Bourbon riddle that has been put out to the world for someone to solve, and the first person to solve it gets a case of Buffalo Trace bourbon.
Ooh.
And we're thinking that maybe you or one of your listeners might be able to help get this thing solved, because it's kind of been 2 years that nobody's been able to solve this riddle.
That is really cool. I'm definitely going to have to look into that.
Yes.
I mean, the whole case.
Yeah, a whole case of bourbon is yours for the taking.
I like it.
Or for one of your listeners.
I like it.
Yeah, so I'll read the riddle right now. It's short and sweet. The Breakfast, Tea, and Bourbon riddle is: I fly like a realized bourbon red with a pointy head and feathers on my butt. Where am I? And it solves to a 4-inch by 4-inch plot somewhere in the United States.
Whoa.
It seems simple, right?
It seems simple, but it's like eluded everybody for like 2 years. Like nobody can figure this thing out. And there's been a lot of guesses. I'll go ahead and like explain one little piece real quick. Just it may have something to do with finding this location or not, but a pointy head with feathers on the butt, a lot of people speculate that could be some kind of arrow.
Yeah.
Lots of arrows have been guessed. Lots of turkey varieties or things to do with turkeys have been guessed. Nobody's been able to crack this thing yet. So we're hoping that maybe one of you can help us, because we want it cracked, because as soon as it's cracked, that might help get that ball rolling.
That is so neat. I love that. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, we're going to have to do a little call out to our listeners and see if they can figure it out. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a lot of fun to have somebody finally solve it. And it
seems very fitting here.
Yeah, it seemed extremely fitting to share that with you and your listeners.
I agree. No, that's wonderful.
If any of your listeners want to get into treasure hunting, Oak Island is a treasure hunt that's lasted over 200 years. we can't go to Oak Island and dig ourselves. They'll probably arrest us, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Let's not push it.
Yeah, let's not push that. So there are treasure hunts just all over the world where people can just get into. You know, all it takes sometimes is buying that metal detector or buying they have these big magnets that can hold like 1,000 pounds. You take it and you throw it off of a dock and you try to stick it to something metal and you pull it back up and you see what you found. That's treasure hunting too.
Mm-hmm, right.
But there's also all these books and all of these poems and all of these different varieties of treasure hunts out there. And that's what we cover on our other podcasts. So if anybody's interested, check that one out as well. But definitely check out Oak Island because we all love that place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you two so much for coming on the show. We very much appreciate it. And it's really, really nice to talk to other podcasters that are super into Oak Island.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
So if our listeners want to follow you guys, where can they find you on social media and where can they find your podcasts, I should say?
Yes. So in regards to Could It Be an Oak Island podcast, we're on Facebook and Instagram at Oak Island Podcast. And then we are on Twitter at Oak Island Pod.
Yep. That's us. And then if you want to find our treasure hunt stuff, you can find us on Facebook at Boots and Armchairs.
All right. Well, thank you guys so very much. Have a great rest of your evening.
And hopefully maybe we can get you guys on one of our podcasts sometime. That'd be fun.
That would be so much fun. Yeah. Anytime.
You guys have a front row ticket to Oak Island, so.
Yes. It's really quite something to be that close to the island. I do not take it for granted, just so you know.
Well, it's great.
Oak Island is a very fascinating story with so much paranormal activity, bad luck, sorrow, heartbreak, disappointment, and history. It almost sounds like we made this stuff up, but these are both facts and firsthand accounts from hardworking, logical, and brilliant minds. If there's anyone who currently doesn't believe in the paranormal, I would have to say that a place like Oak Island might actually make you change your mind. And Jen, when we were out in our tour, I had this sort of like moment of revelation. And I said, because I've been fascinated with Oak Island for as long as I could basically read a somewhat adult book. And if I could have told myself when I was 8 years old that I would have been living this moment, experiencing the storytelling and getting to see so many parts of Oak Island back then, I probably would have shaken myself as an 8-year-old and been like, do you have any idea like how cool this is going to be for you when you're older? I honestly cannot say enough about the people that we've met that work on the island and that are involved with the show, because they are some of the most gracious and caring people around. It's awesome.
Agreed. And just very passionate about obviously what they're doing. And it was just an incredible experience all around. And one little thing I was going to mention, because I didn't say it to you, but when we were on our tour going around the island.
Yes.
I had the strangest feeling of like, were you ever at like a outdoor concert or like a large concert outside where you like, if you just shut your eyes, you can like feel how many people are around you? Like you just almost feel that heaviness of being surrounded by like a lot of people. Yeah. I had that feeling the night that we were on the tour ourselves.
Really?
And
at what point? Where were we?
Well, we stopped and we were just looking. We were taking pictures of the light, like that was over by where
the money pit.
The money pit, because we were just stopped to take a picture. I think a couple of the people on the tour were taking pictures, and I stuck my head out, and it was just like this weird. It was just like the same feeling as being at like an outdoor concert and feeling like all these people around you. It was just really strange because obviously there wasn't that many people with us, so
that is very strange. Now, Jen.
Yes.
It's time for our Patreon shoutouts.
Yes.
If you want to become a patron donor, you just need to visit patreon.com/booze and bourbon. So when you become a Patreon supporter, you get behind the scenes videos, you get Jen's ex-bartender cocktail recipes, you get articles written by me, and you also get a shout out on the show. Plus you get much, much more. There are 2 tiers of Patreon donors. They start at $5 and the top tier goes at $10, and you get extra benefits when you're in the top tier. So make sure you go on over to that website and check it out. And Jen, let's start with the first patrons.
Well, we have Rebecca, Stephanie, the ABV Network, the Ghost Story Guys, Aaron, another Aaron, and our newest patron, Cindy, who writes the book Annie Goes to Oak Island. We definitely want to thank all of you from the bottom of our hearts. With all your support, we will continue to make the show better and better.
Agreed. So if people want to find us on social media, where can they stalk us at?
Well, you can stalk us on Instagram, Booze and Bourbon. You can stalk us on Facebook, Booze and Bourbon the podcast. And of course, you can most definitely listen to us and find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. I think we're on Spotify now as well.
Mm-hmm. We're on pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. So if this is your first time listening to the show, thank you so much for listening. Just hit subscribe on any of the podcast providers. And if you're feeling so inclined, give us a review, because any 5-star review will definitely make us more visible on the podcasting charts. And if you ever want to send us an email, you can send it to boozeandbourbon@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys. We love your listener stories, your would you rather questions. And even if you just want to say hello, you can reach out to us on social media. We will always respond. And we definitely want to give an extra special thank you to everybody who helped us create this episode. There are so many of you. Mm-hmm. Oak Island Tours tour guide Lisa Moore, thank you so much. Tony Sampson of Salty Dog Sea Tours and cast member on the show. Mm-hmm. Dustin and Deidre from the Could It Be an Oak Island podcast. And fellow cast member of The Curse of Oak Island, Jack Begley. And Jack Begley's shirt.
Which has its own Instagram page.
Yeah, it's called Jack Begley's shirt. You guys need to check that out. It's actually really good. They've been doing a countdown to the most recent episode coming out, so hit them up as well. So thank you guys so much for listening. We are very grateful. And from the bottom of our Crown Royal soaked ghostly hearts, I'm Kim, and that's Jen, and we're signing off from Booze and Bourbon. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Booze and Bourbon is part of the ABV Network. For more information or to advertise on the show, please head over to abvnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and cheers.
This has been a Steve Akeley production.